Hello viewers, welcome to ETV Bharat. This is Chandrakala Chaudhary, and today we are joined in by India's former ambassador to Myanmar, Mr. Rajiv Bhatia, who is also now the Distinguished Fellow in Gateway House, Mumbai. Well, as over the years, we have seen that throughout its decades of independence, Myanmar has struggled with military rule, civil war, poor governance. And now the center has come up with a decision to scrap the free movement regime between India and Myanmar. To know more on this, we are joined in by, of course, our India's former ambassador, who has been closely watching the developments in Myanmar. Many welcome, sir. Welcome to
Thank
ETV
you very
Bharat,
much.
and many thanks for joining us. So my first question, of course, as we have seen the recent, the situation in Myanmar and now the scrapping of the free movement regime between the two countries. How do you see this decision? And my question to you would be, how is it going to impact India's Act East policy and also the relation between the two countries going further?
Thank you very much for your gracious invitation. I'm very happy to talk about the theme you have chosen today. Let us begin with the situation on the India-Myanmar border. As we know, four states of India touch the borders of Myanmar. They are Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram. The total length of the border is 1,643 kilometers. Now, this is a very porous border. It's very difficult to regulate traffic there because there are mountains, forests, rivers, and valleys. So for a very long time, in the past, there was free movement of the border people. But later, this was formalized in 2018 through an agreement between India and Myanmar, which allowed people living in the border areas to cross without a passport and without a visa to the other side for family reasons, social reasons, business reasons. But this began to be misused by a lot of negative elements which have been involved in smuggling, drug trafficking, gun running, and the rest of it. So this was taken very seriously, into note by the government of India, and they came to the conclusion that this kind of negative activities are not good for India's security. It is this background which compelled the Ministry of Home Affairs to decide to scrap, as you said rightly, the free border movement regime or free movement border regime there, and yet it can't be done, in a day because it needs also to be negotiated and discussed with the Myanmar government. So that is exactly what is happening. But meanwhile, Home Ministry has recommended that the regime should be suspended. So in effect, it will be properly regulated. There will be a few designated points from where people from both sides can come to each other's part, but with the help of a passport and a visa.
Right.
So this is the main issue. And then you have also raised two questions, how it affects the relationship and how it impacts on the
Look East policy.
Look East and Act East policy. Very briefly on the relationship, this is obviously not a very positive development because this means that we have to restrict the border movement, but it has become inevitable for the security reasons which I have mentioned. There is another reason, which is that, as you said in your own introduction, Myanmar is going through a very difficult security and political situation. There is a civil war there. And so impact of the conflict there is coming onto the Indian side as well. So we obviously are keen to avoid that. As far as the impact on Act East policy is concerned, I think that policy deals with many other countries. So we very much hope that India would need to focus a bit more on the other countries than Myanmar for the time being.
So my second question would be, of course, now the fact that this free trade, the free movement regime between the two countries that has been scrapped, how this is going to impact the locals out there when we talk about the people who are already, in a very, very distress situation, given the situation in Myanmar since the coup. How do you see this, and do you think this particular decision by India is going to impact the relationship further? Because we know that how Myanmar is one of the most is a significant when we know the relationship, it's very significant in the changing geopolitical context, and later we'll come to the northeast part of India. How is it going to like? So your take on that?
So I think the view from Delhi is very clear. India very much wants good neighborhood relations with all its neighboring countries, but it cannot be at the expense of the sovereignty and security of India. If foreign elements are going to impact adversely on the security, then the regulations have to be tightened. This is the view from Delhi. As far as view from the states is concerned, I think there are variations. The banning or the scrapping of the free movement regime was actually requested by the government of Manipur. So they have supported the idea. Assam has supported the idea. To some extent, Nagaland has supported the idea.
Although they are also criticisms coming from the cookies and of course,
yes, and Mizoram. Yes, and Mizoram in particular. So there are diverse reactions. Very clearly, people at the local level feel that this will hamper the cross-border movement, which is the positive kind of activities. That means the border hearts, the social visits, the familial links, they could also be affected to some extent, but the balancing will have to be done. And as long as the government can prevent the bad people, the negative people to indulge in bad activities, then there would be a possibility to encourage the good activities. This is how I look at it. So in short, it's a kind of an indispensable or unavoidable decision, but everything will depend on how it is implemented in actual practice.
Right. So let's talk about the Northeast. We have seen the violence a few months back, of course, in Manipur. Do you think this particular, of course, this free movement regime was one key reason behind such violence in Manipur? And also, how is it affecting Northeast security, for that matter?
But this is a very difficult and delicate question. There are different views of the state governments and other stakeholders. From this distance, sitting in Delhi, we can only go by our research and the pursuit of reports that we see. I think the bulk of experts perhaps would agree that the situation in Manipur, became quite dismal because of the internal factors. The conflict between the two communities, Métis and Kukis. But the fact that there was an external dimension, that is people coming in from Myanmar and probably, further augmenting the difficulties. So we can say perhaps that the external element has further increased or exacerbated the crisis.
Okay.
So that is where we are. I think we should also take note of the fact of the government decision that the entire India-Myanmar border will also be fenced. Right now, there is no fencing in most parts, but now the fencing through the entire length will take place. Naturally, it will take time. But then, as I said, the policy of Delhi is very clear. Policy of the central government is very clear. The security of the country comes first.
So what's next for Myanmar?
Yes, that is a crucial question. You are absolutely right. Thousands of people from Myanmar have come and taken shelter in Mizoram and Manipur in particular. The figures are not actually available in the public domain, but it's quite a sizable factor. And this is happening because of the conflict there. Not merely ordinary people, but even Myanmar police and military personnel have come over and took shelter, and then they had to be repatriated back. So what is really happening in Myanmar? What is happening in Myanmar is that, as you know, 3 years back, the military staged a coup it overthrew the democratic government, and people have not liked it. So people are, opposing the military's policies. And by people, I mean various kinds of groups, the ethnic groups, the majority Bamar groups. Some are doing political struggle, others are actually doing armed struggle.
Right.
So it is a full situation of civil war in that country. And three power centers, the army, the ethnic groups, and the political elements are involved in that struggle. So in this kind of situation, what is India's policy and what India can do? I recently wrote about this in a widely read op-ed in the Hindu. The central point here is that first of all, we have to keep in close touch with the army government, because our policy is that whoever is in the government, we deal with them. But at the same time, because others have also become important in governance, we should broaden our contacts with those other stakeholders. But that is not enough. I think we also need to work with some like-minded countries, such as ASEAN, members of Quad, maybe even China, to come up with a blueprint that we can present to the Myanmar friends and say, look, you cannot solve your own problems, but we are also your neighbors, we are affected, and here is our formula for you to work on and consider. This is what I feel should be the central anchor of India's policy towards Myanmar now.
So you're saying that even if it's required, that we can take help of China. So do you think what's China's role would be here?
Well, I did mention about inclusion of China, but it's a subject that is demanding discussion. Why do I refer about China? It is because China is a fact of life in Myanmar. China is a very important player in Myanmar. China is involved with the government, is involved with the various ethnic groups, etc. And yet, we know that it is not easy to work with China. They go around defying and flouting agreements after having agreed to them. We see what is happening on our own border. So it is a very fine balance that we will have to strike. A decision will have to be taken after much internal consultation. But the central fact is that all the 5 neighbors of Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, India, China, and Bangladesh, they have a stake in that country, and they will need to contribute to reversing the present situation of instability, violence, and conflict in Myanmar.
Right. So talking about Bangladesh, the foreign minister was here recently, and of course, Myanmar was also one of the point of discussion here. How do you see the role of Bangladesh here? Because that's also a country which is actually, when we talk about the border issues or the insurgency taking place in the northeast, there are a lot of discussion on Bangladesh-India relations. Talking about the CA in that for that matter. How do you see Bangladesh has a role to play here?
You are right. Bangladesh is particularly affected directly by the situation in Myanmar. A huge number of Rohingya refugees have taken shelter in Bangladesh, causing massive stress on their economic and social system. So, unfortunately for Bangladesh, the return of Rohingya refugees back to Myanmar is not receiving the kind of attention it should. And as you rightly said, when the Bangladesh FM was here, he was also asked about the free movement regime. And he supported the idea that it is going to be stopped because, the ease with which illegals from Myanmar are coming to do the wrong kind of activities is not good either for India or for Bangladesh. So I think we can say that Bangladesh leadership fully understands India's concerns and is supporting us.
Right, sir. So, of course, India has been reiterating its stance when it comes to a push to a democracy in Myanmar. Is this happening anytime soon?
I think we have to be realistic and we have to be hopeful. having known this country and its very friendly people, a lot of them who believe in policy of peace and Buddhism, one feels for them. They are suffering a lot. And therefore, for their sake, we hope that they will see the light at the end of the tunnel. They have an incredible leader there, Madame Aung San Suu Kyi,
Yes.
who has been given solitary imprisonment for 33 years, or at least imprisonment for 33 years. So they really have to recognize, the people of Myanmar and the leaders of Myanmar, that above all, they are the ones who can solve this problem. It is their internal problem. They must reach some basic understandings which allows a government system that is acceptable to the people of Myanmar. So to begin with, they need to go back to the pre-coup system of limited democracy. And then from there, they need to build the space for democracy even more. Can this happen in the next 1 or 2 years? Perhaps not. But all the right-minded people in Myanmar and their friends such as India must work hard in that direction.
Right, sir. My last question would be, of course, the center has emphasized that the reason behind scrapping this FMR is of course, to maintain the demographic structure of the Northeast. Because over the years, we have seen, as we have already mentioned, about the influx of immigrations. How do you see this? And now that, what kind of changes can be expected after this FMR? Or do we really expect any changes when it comes to maintaining democracy, a democratic structure of the demographic structure of the Northeast?
I've served in the government of India for 36 years. And so I know that the government authorities always have more information than those of us who are now outside the government. So I can assure you that this decision on scrapping FMR would not have taken lightly. It has been taken after due consideration and keeping the interests of the country in mind. So we will have to see, as I said, how this is implemented. Meanwhile, I think everybody will have to make sure that a proper balancing of protection of security interests and expansion of friendly, positive relations with the neighbor take place. I think the government is fully aware of that need for balance.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, and giving your valuable views, and of course, telling our viewers in actually what's happening in Myanmar and the implications that it could have on the relations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.